Hello, I'm Chris Burns, and welcome to The Network, where we connect into a matrix of newsmakers to get to the heart of an issue. And watch out, they've got to answer in 25 seconds or less, or else. Let's take a look at that issue right now.
They sounded the alarm at the climate talks in Durban. Scientists, officials, NGOs, that unless the world acts quickly to slash greenhouse gases, it faces a catastrophic rise in global temperatures. Enough to melt glaciers and polar ice caps, trigger catastrophic droughts, storms, and rising sea levels that could leave tens of millions homeless. The world's big three CO2 emitters, the US, India, and China, came under intense pressure from developing countries and island states to break the deadlock. Marathon talks produced what the Kyoto Accords failed to do, a commitment by all the biggest polluters to reach a legally mandated global agreement reducing greenhouse gases. The roadmap is a long one. Talks until 2015 on a pact to take effect in 2020. By then, could it be too late? Will we have reached the tipping point of no return when all we can do is geoengineer the meltdown?
Now, wired into this edition of The Network from Oslo, Samantha Smith, who's head of the World Wildlife Fund's Climate and Energy Initiative. She led the WWF's delegation in Durban. From Copenhagen, Jacqueline McGlade, who is also in Durban. She's the executive director of the European Environment Agency. And Sir Graham Watson over here at the European Parliament in Brussels, a UK MEP and president of the European Liberal Democrat and Reform Party. Here's a question to all of you, starting with Samantha. Durban, it was supposed to replace Kyoto. Instead, it produced a roadmap and a timetable for more talks. Was it a failure? Is it too late now anyway to try to stop this global catastrophe?
It's really not ever too late to do something about climate change. So I think that's the first thing we have to keep in mind. We should all look at what we can do now, businesses, people, and governments, to slow down and eventually to stop climate change. But if we measure it against what government should have done, it was a failure.
Okay. Jacqueline, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I think it opened the doors to a very different kind of negotiation, one where there's more equity and where countries don't necessarily find themselves aligned with their traditional partners. So talking across borders, talking across economies, I think that's what Durban did for us.
Okay, let me pitch it a little bit differently to Graham. Greenpeace calls this Durban agreement nothing more than a voluntary deal that's put off for a decade, during which we pass from danger to potential catastrophe. What do you think?
Well, I think Durban was a step forward, although not far enough or fast enough. What we have for the first time is a legally binding agreement that will bring the world's three largest emitters, China, the USA and India, within it, accepting that this is a matter for international law, not simply a voluntary code of practice.
Okay, but how much do we really think that the U.S., China, India are actually going to finally agree by 2015 to some kind of legally binding agreement? Samantha.
Well, first of all, I'd like to push back on the idea that the agreement really is legally binding. I mean, the Environment Minister of India has been out in the press and has said already to the Indian press that this is not necessarily the case. The test of whether or not it's legally binding is what countries do between now and 2015 and what they agree. The other thing is that some countries, such as China, already are doing a lot on the national level about climate change. Of course, we wish they would do even more. But again, we're not going to know what they're really going to do until we get to 2015 and we have the deal on the table.
Okay. Jacqueline, you've been to the glaciers in the north. You've taken executives up there to show them on the ground what's going on. And right now, German scientists are saying they see a 3.5 Celsius rise beyond that targeted 2 Celsius rise. Are we headed for catastrophe? And are you having some kind of impact when you take those executives up to the north?
There's no doubt that seeing is believing, and I think people who are skeptics, when actually sitting on the ice cap, seeing it melting below them, can have a complete change of belief and systems and understand that they have to do something now. But the dramatic nature of the Arctic takes a long time to interpret itself into political action, and I think that's the gap that we now need to bridge between now and 2015.
Okay, Graham, what action we've seen lately is that Canada is saying they're going to quit Kyoto. They're saying it's even counterproductive. Are the U.S. and developing countries opted out of it already? Is Kyoto as good as dead right now?
No, it's certainly not dead. I think Canada is wrong. It's a pity that their Conservative government has taken this decision, and I hope that some future government, a new Liberal government perhaps, may well reverse it. Everybody has to be in there. We've all accepted that it's legally necessary. Look, there's a huge amount to do. We should be working faster, but everybody's got to be on board, and the Canadian citizens have to tell their government that.
Okay, Graham. To you, Jacqueline, do you think Europe should stick to its plan to cut emissions 20% by 2020, or even some people say 30%? Or will Europe lose its competitiveness with these other countries that are opting out of Kyoto?
No, I think it's quite the opposite. It's clear now that even with a radical cut, even up to 50%, we can see that innovation brings with it an economic drive, which is what will make Europe in the end more successful.
But that's easy to say, but in the process, if you're coming down really tough on a number of industries, you're going to be shutting down certain things. That's going to throw people out of work, no?
Yeah, but there's another side to it. Inefficient industries actually cause a lot of pollution and a lot of health costs. So by taking some of them out of production, you're actually improving the efficiency overall of the economy and making us a much better and healthier place to be.
Okay, Samantha, part of this agreement in Durban was that there's a green climate fund that's supposed to raise $100 billion a year. And how much of the developed world is already falling behind on its pledges for technology transfers, for subsidies to save forest? Do you really believe that the developed world is going to come across with $100 billion a year to do this?
I think it's up to the developed world to fulfill its promises. That's the first thing. But if we look at what's happening right now with the Eurozone crisis and so forth, we can see that it's a tall order for some European governments to call on their citizens to come up with the money. What they have to do, in addition to coming up with public funds for the future, is they have to reach out to innovative sources of finance. WWF is promoting a levy on bunker fuels. That's the dirty fuels that are used for aviation and shipping in order to generate climate finance.
Jacqueline, you've been on the ground up there, but there are global warming skeptics, as you've mentioned. They say the climate change is beyond human control. It's going to happen no matter what we do. So that our CO2 cuts then just killing jobs. How do you answer those skeptics?
I think if we don't do something, that even more people will lose their jobs. We had a meeting with Nobel Prize winners and political leaders, and it's pretty clear that the two sides actually see that action to mitigate is just as important as adaptation. But in the end, if we don't act now, even more people will lose their work, will lose employment, will actually lose the way in which we live today.
Okay, Graham, let's talk about carbon credits. Some people say that those are a joke, that this whole idea of establishing a price of carbon is not working, that these carbon credits are not really helping to cut CO2. What do you think?
No, it's certainly not a joke. It's true that we haven't got it working properly and that we haven't got the pricing right, but carbon credits is the best way of using market mechanisms. And remember, market forces are the most powerful we have to help us fight climate change. The European Union is right on this, as it has been on a number of other issues, and I think over time this will be recognized.
Okay, but to Samantha, what about this idea about, and at Durban they agreed to put carbon capture to give carbon capture carbon credits under the Clean Development Mechanism. Do you really think that is proper to do, and is that an answer to cutting CO2?
No, WWF does not think that that's proper to do. I mean, the CDM and the carbon markets are really best suited for transferring technologies that are already mature and that can be easily adopted in other countries. And that's not the case for carbon capture and storage. Someday, maybe, it will be a solution of last resort. But at the moment, there's so much more that we can do within renewable energy and energy efficiency. We should do that first, and it will create jobs.
Then, Jacqueline, what about maybe a crash program with nuclear and with solar? Could that be the answer?
No, I still think that distributed energy systems, which actually take away this kind of centralized mammoth generation of energy, is one thing that we need to relook at. Because in a way, we have to use indigenous sources of energy, and that means solar, it means a whole range of renewables, including wind, and not just simply putting all our eggs in one basket.
Thanks, Jacqueline. I'd like to thank all of our guests, Samantha Smith, Jacqueline McGlade, and Sir Graham Watson. I'm Chris Burns, and until next time, thanks for connecting with The Network.